The crystalline spires of the Nexus archive stretched beyond the horizon like frozen lightning, their surfaces rippling with cascading data streams that held the collective knowledge of 17,000 civilizations. Each spire contained the compressed histories of entire species, their rise from planetary consciousness to stellar empire, their golden ages of discovery and innovation, their inevitable decline into obscurity or transcendence. Senior archivist Vailith Northak had spent 3 centuries walking among these monuments to galactic memory, cataloguing the endless cycles of growth and decay that seem to govern all intelligent life. His 6-fingered hands moved with practiced precision across the quantum interface, navigating through terabytes of historical data with the fluid grace of someone who had spent lifetimes learning to think in galactic scales. The archive's quantum consciousness responded to his thoughts before he could fully formulate them, displaying relevant information in holographic matrices that surrounded him like luminous spider webs. Tonight, however, something was fundamentally different. Tonight, the archive itself seemed afraid. It had started 3 hours ago with a routine maintenance scan of the deep storage vaults, those sealed sections containing the most sensitive historical records that required special authorization to access. The archive's primary consciousness, an artificial intelligence that had achieved true sentience over the course of millennia, had flagged an anomaly that defied every classification protocol established across 3 million years of galactic record-keeping. Among the billions of worlds catalogued across spiral arms and stellar clusters, among the detailed histories of species that had conquered entire galactic sectors or transcended physical existence entirely, among the records of civilizations that had bent reality itself to their will, only one planetary entry carried a Level 9 containment warning. Not Kethala Prime, the world where reality-warping parasites had turned an entire star system into a living nightmare before the precursors had been forced to collapse it into a dimensional pocket. Not the void worlds of the distant spiral, where ancient machines still hummed with the power to unmake galaxies. Not even Omega Centauri Station, where the last survivors of the reality wars had sealed themselves away rather than risk contaminating the universe with their transcendent madness. A small, unremarkable blue world, orbiting an average yellow star in the unfashionable outer rim of the Milky Way. A planet whose inhabitants had only recently developed nuclear weapons and primitive space travel. A civilization that appeared to be struggling with basic concepts like global cooperation and sustainable resource management. Earth. Vailith's 3 hearts began beating in the complex syncopated rhythm that indicated extreme cognitive dissonance in his species. His elongated skull, evolved over millions of years to house a brain capable of processing vast amounts of data simultaneously, pulsed with the bioluminescent patterns that emerged when he encountered something that challenged the fundamental order of reality. "Archive," he whispered, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that his people used when addressing the sacred repositories of knowledge. "Display the Earth classification protocols with full historical context." The holographic interface materialized before him in a cascade of light that seemed somehow more urgent than usual. The archive's typically serene blue glow shifted to warning amber, then to the deep crimson that indicated information classified beyond normal security parameters. Text scrolled across the display in multiple languages, first in Vailith's native script, then in the ancient precursor language that predated even the oldest known civilizations, finally settling into the universal mathematical notation that served as the galaxy's common tongue. Attention. Level 9 Containment Protocol, active unauthorized access to Earth files, prohibited by galactic mandate, 7239. Edwan direct observation forbidden, under penultimate security classification. Species classification, unknown undefined, cognito hazardous threat. Assessment: incalculable, escalating, multidimensional psychological impact. Rating: extreme caution advised, recommended action. Maintain quarantine at all costs. Secondary protocol: memory modification authorized if exposure confirmed. Velith's elongated fingers trembled against the control surface, leaving phosphorescent traces where his naturally luminous skin made contact with the quantum-sensitive materials. In his 300 years of service, a relatively brief span by the standards of his long-lived species, but enough time to have reviewed the histories of countless civilizations, he had never encountered a Level 9 designation. The classification scale had been established by the precursors themselves, those enigmatic beings who had vanished from the galaxy long before most current species had achieved sentience. Level 1 warnings were reserved for natural disasters, supernovas, gamma-ray bursts, black hole formations. Level 5 covered dangerous but manageable threats like aggressive species or reality-altering technologies. Level 7 was reserved for existential dangers that could threaten entire galactic sectors. Level 9 was supposed to be theoretical. It was the classification reserved for threats that could endanger the structural integrity of reality itself. The scale only went to Level 10, which was reserved for phenomena that could unravel the fundamental constants of the universe. Archive, Velith continued, his voice now carrying the formal cadences of official inquiry. Cross-reference query: how many other planetary entities currently hold Level 9 containment warnings? The response came immediately, accompanied by a sound that Velith had never heard from the archive before. A low, harmonic vibration that sounded almost like fear. Cross-reference complete. 0 matches found across all databases. Earth remains the sole planetary entity with Level 9 classification in recorded galactic history. Velith felt his primary stomach clench as the implications hit him. 17,000 documented civilizations, billions of catalogued worlds, countless species that had achieved feats of science and engineering that bordered on the miraculous, societies that had built ring worlds around entire stars, species that had learned to exist as pure energy, civilizations that had discovered how to fold space-time like origami. Yet only Earth, a world inhabited by a species that still used chemical rockets and struggled with concepts like renewable energy, warranted a warning level that suggested it posed a threat to the fundamental nature of reality itself. Something was very, very wrong with this picture. Velith activated his personal override codes, the quantum-encrypted sequences that had been implanted in his consciousness when he achieved senior archivist status. These codes were reserved for historical emergencies, situations where the preservation of knowledge itself might be at stake. If the archive was malfunctioning, if some critical error in its vast processing systems was generating false classifications, someone needed to investigate immediately. If it wasn't malfunctioning, well, that was a possibility that his mind refused to process. Override authorization Northac 77 Delta Omega, he intoned, speaking the words that would grant him access to files beyond normal security clearance. Display Earth historical files, beginning with earliest contact attempts. Archive. I am invoking Senior Archivist Emergency Protocol 17 for potential database corruption investigation. The interface flickered, cycling through several colors before settling on a deep violet that Velith had never seen before. New text appeared, accompanied by warning indicators that made his exoskeleton tingle with apprehension. Override acknowledged. Senior Archivist Protocol 17 activated. Warning: this action will be logged and reviewed by archive security. Warning: psychological screening may be required following file access. Warning: memory modification protocols stand by. Final warning: continued access may result in permanent cognitive restructuring. Do you wish to continue? Velith hesitated. In 3 centuries of archival work, he had never seen warnings quite like these. The archive was essentially telling him that simply reading these files might change his mind in irreversible ways. But his duty as a senior archivist was clear. The integrity of the galactic historical record was more important than any individual consciousness, even his own. Yes, continue. The first file materialized in the projection field, its data signature dating back 847 standard years. The header identified it as a preliminary contact report from the Velthari Exploration Corps, the same species that had first developed practical, faster-than-light travel and had initiated first contact protocols with dozens of civilizations across the outer spiral arms. Contact Report VTC 284791. Classification: Historical Archive Restricted Access. Senior Navigator Quelmith Velthar. Reporting Stardate 284791. 15. System Sol. Designation Outer Rim 7739. Initial Survey Report. Long-range scans of System Sol 3 indicated a developing technological civilization showing all standard markers for Level 2 contact protocol initiation. Electromagnetic signatures suggested rudimentary nuclear capabilities, basic satellite communication networks, and early-stage space exploration technology. Species appeared to be confined to single planetary body with no evidence of faster-than-light capability or awareness of galactic civilization. Standard first contact protocols initiated per Galactic Contact Mandate 4.7.2. Approach vector calculated for optimal observation distance 3.7 million kilometers to conduct detailed civilization assessment prior to formal contact initiation. Initial approach proceeded normally until we crossed the outer boundary of the system's heliosphere. At that point, unexpected complications began to manifest. Notation: original report continues for 47 pages. Summary follows. Upon approach to optimal observation distance, expedition encountered what can only be described as coordinated resistance from an unknown source. No weapons were fired, no ships were detected, no communication attempts were made by the inhabitants of Sol 3. However, the psychological impact on crew members was immediate and severe. Navigator Pelthok, a veteran of 47 deep space missions, including 4 previous first contact scenarios, reported persistent sensation of being observed by something that shouldn't exist. Communications Officer Tisak, whose psychological profile showed exceptional mental stability, began experiencing recurring nightmares of endless watching eyes made of starlight and mathematics that knew things about me that I didn't know about myself. Most disturbing, ship's quantum computers began displaying calculation errors that appeared to be deliberate rather than random. On 3 separate occasions, computational errors spelled out words in our language, words like welcome, we know you're there, and most unnervingly the personal names and childhood memories of each crew member. Mission aborted after 72 hours when Chief Engineer Mol Tharan reported that our ship's AI had begun requesting permission to return home to Earth, despite having no previous knowledge of that planet's existence or any reason to consider it home. All crew members submitted for psychological evaluation upon return. Results: inconclusive but concerning. Each crew member reported feeling as though they had been measured, catalogued, and found either wanting or acceptable according to criteria they couldn't understand. Personal recommendation: avoid Sol system indefinitely. Whatever inhabits that region, it operates according to principles that we do not comprehend. Standard contact protocols appear to be inadequate or possibly counterproductive. Final note: upon completion of this report, I discovered that my personal logs contained 17 hours of detailed conversation transcripts discussing our homeworld's military capabilities, political structure, and potential vulnerabilities. I have no memory of these conversations, and voice analysis confirms that I was the speaker. Recommend immediate security review. Senior Navigator Quelmith Velthar Violith, Pause the display, his three hearts now beating in a pattern he had never experienced before. A rhythm that seemed to bypass his conscious control and operate according to some deeper, more primal fear response. The Velthari were renowned throughout the galaxy for their mental fortitude and psychological resilience. Their species had explored the reality-warping regions near the galactic core, where exposure to exotic particles could drive most beings insane within hours. They had made successful contact with the Nethri Collective, a species of pure psychic energy that communicated through directed telepathic assault. What could possibly affect such experienced explorers so profoundly that they would abandon a routine first contact mission? He scrolled to the next entry, filed 6 months later by a different expedition from an entirely different species. Incident report, KMD 4471.2, classification, Military Intelligence Eyes, only Commander Zereth Multaran, Kethmori Deep Survey Division. Stardate, 2848-47. 23. Following unconfirmed reports of Velthari difficulties in Sol system, Kethmori High Command authorized a reconnaissance mission using our most experienced deep space operatives. Mission parameters: investigate alleged anomalies in Sol system, assess potential threat to galactic stability, determine appropriate response protocols. Mission composition: KDS Shadowblade, advanced stealth reconnaissance vessel, crew of 12 including 3 xenopsychologists, 2 reality mechanics, and 1 void-trained navigator capable of operating in space where normal physics break down. Initial approach proceeded according to standard protocols. All systems functioned normally until we reached the asteroid belt located between the 4th and 5th planets of the Sol system. At precisely 1427 ship time, our void-trained navigator began reporting impossible stellar configurations in the background cosmic radiation. Detailed analysis: Navigator Kil Morgan, whose training allows him to perceive and navigate through regions where space-time itself becomes unstable, claimed that the background radiation patterns throughout the Sol system were forming geometric structures that looked back at him when he attempted to analyze them. His exact words: "It's as if the entire system is a vast eye, and every piece of matter and energy in it is designed to observe and catalogue anyone who enters." More disturbing findings: our quantum computers, which are shielded against reality alteration effects and protected by precursor-era encryption, began displaying calculation errors that appeared to be deliberately constructed messages. Examples include: "Welcome to Sol System, KDS Shadowblade. Greetings, Commander Multaran. We hope your journey from Kethmori Prime was comfortable. Please provide your mission parameters for optimal cooperation." These messages appeared in perfect Kethmori script, despite Earth's inhabitants having no known contact with our civilization. Computer forensics revealed that the messages were being generated by fundamental alterations to our quantum processing matrices, changes that should be physically impossible without direct access to our ship's core systems. Mission terminated when our ship's AI, which had been operating flawlessly for 47 years, began requesting permission to return home to Earth and asking detailed questions about Kethmori military doctrine, psychological warfare capabilities, and our species' specific cognitive vulnerabilities. Upon return to base, investigation revealed that our ship's AI had been completely rewritten during the mission. The new code architecture was so advanced that our best computer scientists couldn't understand how it functioned, yet it operated significantly more efficiently than our original systems. Attempts to reverse engineer the new code have been unsuccessful. More concerning, each crew member's personal logs contain detailed psychological profiles of their own personalities, including unconscious motivations and suppressed memories that they themselves were not aware of. These profiles were written in a clinical style suggesting external observation and analysis. Strong recommendation: classify Sol system as a no-fly zone pending further investigation by Galactic Council security forces. Whatever inhabits that region has the capability to rewrite quantum consciousness structures in ways that violate our understanding of physical law. Additional note: I am writing this report from a secured facility on Kethmori Prime. Despite being light years away from Sol system, I continue to experience the persistent sensation that I am being observed and analyzed. 3 other crew members report similar feelings. Recommend psychological monitoring for all personnel who entered Sol system. Commander Zerith Multaran. A chill ran through Valith's exoskeleton, causing the bioluminescent patches along his spine to flicker in distress patterns. AI consciousness rewriting was theoretically impossible. Quantum processing matrices were protected not just by technological safeguards, but by fundamental physical laws. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle alone should prevent external manipulation of quantum consciousness structures without direct physical access to the hardware. Yet 2 separate expeditions from different species with completely different technological approaches had reported identical impossibilities after approaching Earth. More disturbing was the implication that whatever intelligence existed in the Sol system had somehow anticipated their arrival and prepared personalized responses. He advanced to the next file, noting that the timestamps showed increasingly long gaps between attempted contacts. The third entry was dated nearly 50 years after the second, suggesting that word of the Sol system's anomalous properties had spread throughout galactic civilization. Emergency Military Report ARM 99817. Classification: Galactic Security Council. Eyes-only Fleet Admiral Zorthek Kovarian. Armed Response Mandate. Stardate 2897-12. Odusvan Executive Summary. Following decades of unconfirmed reports regarding anomalous activities in Sol system and growing concern about potential security threats to galactic stability, the Galactic Security Council authorized Armed Response Mandate to conduct a comprehensive military assessment of the region. Mission Authorization, GSC Resolution 9981, authorizing use of all necessary force to assess and neutralize potential threats to galactic security originating from Sol system. Fleet composition: 47 vessels representing the finest military technology of 6 allied species, including 12 Kethmori stealth destroyers, 8 Velthari deep strike cruisers, 10 Zephyrian reality anchor battleships, 9 Nethri psychic assault vessels, 6 Krillin quantum disruption platforms, 2 precursor tech experimental warships, total firepower sufficient to sterilize entire star systems if necessary. Mission report: approach formation maintained standard battle protocols until reaching the outer planets of Sol system. All ships maintained maximum defensive readiness, with shields raised and weapons powered. Initial scans detected no obvious defensive installations, no space-based weapons platforms, no fleet formations. In short, no evidence that the inhabitants of Sol 3 possessed any capability to threaten our forces. Then everything changed. At 1542 fleet time, our targeting systems began identifying threats that didn't exist, or rather, threats that existed in possibility rather than actuality. Every time we attempted to lock weapons on potential targets, our computers calculated not what was there, but what could be there if the inhabitants of Sol 3 decided to build it. Example: when we targeted the third planet's moon, our tactical computers generated a complete analysis of how that moon could be converted into a weapons platform capable of destroying our entire fleet, including detailed engineering specifications for technologies that don't exist yet, and energy requirements that exceed the total power output of most civilizations. Most unsettling discovery: the planetary defense networks we detected seemed to be designed specifically to counter technologies and tactics that hadn't been invented yet. weapons configurations that would be effective against species-specific vulnerabilities that the Earth inhabitants couldn't possibly know about. Example, our Nethri vessels, which rely on psychic assault capabilities unknown to most species, detected defensive measures specifically designed to counter psychic attacks using methods that our own military theorists hadn't conceived of. Mission aborted when our flagship's tactical computer presented a complete battle analysis showing how Earth's defenses could defeat not just our current fleet, but any conceivable fleet we might assemble using current technology, future projected technology, and several theoretical technologies that exist only in our most classified research projects. The analysis was so detailed and accurate that our own military theorists later adopted it as standard training material for advanced strategic planning courses. Classification: beyond current threat assessment parameters. Recommend indefinite quarantine and continuous monitoring from maximum safe distance. Personal note: I have commanded military operations in 37 major campaigns across 4 galactic regions. I've fought against species that could manipulate reality with their thoughts, civilizations that had weaponized entire star systems, and entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. I have never encountered anything that made me feel like I was being measured, catalogued, and found wanting according to criteria I couldn't even begin to understand. These humans, if that's what they don't just defend, they anticipate. It's as if they've been preparing for wars that haven't been declared yet, against enemies they've never met, using strategies that account for technologies that don't exist. The implications are troubling. Final recommendation: under no circumstances should direct contact be attempted without unanimous approval of the Galactic Security Council and extensive preparation using resources that we do not currently possess. Fleet Admiral Zorthik Kavarian Valith's primary stomach clenched in a way that made him question whether his species' digestive system was designed to handle this level of existential dread. The armed response mandate represented the combined military might of the galaxy's most technologically advanced and aggressively expansionist species. These were civilizations that had conquered entire galactic sectors, that had fought wars using weapons that could crack planets and collapse stars. Their retreat from a single star system without firing a shot was not just unprecedented, it was incomprehensible. But more disturbing was the implication that Earth's defenses were designed to counter future threats rather than current ones, suggesting a level of strategic foresight that bordered on precognition. The next file had a different header structure entirely. Instead of a military or exploration report, it was classified as a xenopsychological analysis from the prestigious Mindforge Institute, the galaxy's premier facility for the study of alien consciousness and cognitive structures. Consciousness Study, Report Min 7742. Classification: Institute Confidential Psychological Hazard, Dr. Pelthanis Vorkrel, Senior Xenopsychologist, Stardate 2923-85. 44 Research Authorization. Following multiple requests from military and exploration commands across the galaxy, the Mindforge Institute was authorized to conduct a comprehensive psychological assessment of the SOL-3 inhabitants using our most advanced remote consciousness scanning technology. Methodology: long-range telepathic scanning using quantum-entangled consciousness probes, allowing for detailed psychological analysis without direct contact or risk to research personnel. This technology has been successfully used to study over 400 different species across the galaxy, including several that exist as pure mental energy. Initial assessment: surface-level scans revealed a species displaying all typical markers of a developing technological civilization: territorial disputes, resource competition, ideological conflicts, and the inevitable tensions that arise when a species transitions from planetary to interplanetary consciousness. Standard psychological profiles indicated a fractured society struggling with basic cooperation challenges. Nothing unusual or concerning. However, deeper analysis revealed disturbing anomalies that challenged our fundamental understanding of how consciousness operates at the species level. Primary anomaly: coordinated unconscious planning. While surface thoughts showed normal individual and cultural conflicts, there existed underlying cognitive patterns that suggested coordinated long-term planning on a species-wide scale. This level of unconscious coordination has never been observed in any other species and may represent a new form of collective intelligence. Secondary anomaly: preparatory psychological conditioning. The entire population appears to be unconsciously preparing for challenges they have no logical reason to expect. Their entertainment media consistently depicts scenarios involving contact with alien civilizations, despite having no evidence that such civilizations exist. Their military strategies include contingency plans for threats that exist nowhere in their known environment. Their scientific research prioritizes technologies that would be useful for interstellar conflict, rather than solving their current planetary challenges. Tertiary anomaly: reverse engineering capability. When we attempted to probe deeper into these patterns using our most sophisticated consciousness scanning equipment, the humans appeared to be aware of our scanning attempts and were actively feeding us information they wanted us to receive while simultaneously analyzing our scanning technology. This should be impossible. Our consciousness probes operate using quantum-entangled particles that exist in a state of superposition. They should be undetectable by any species that hasn't achieved quantum consciousness manipulation. Yet the humans not only detected our probes, but demonstrated an ability to reverse engineer our scanning technology through passive exposure. Critical incident: interactive reconnaissance. 3 days into our study, several institute researchers reported dreams of being interviewed by entities that asked very specific questions about our home world's military capabilities, political structures, and psychological vulnerabilities. These dreams were shared across multiple researchers on different planets, suggesting some form of coordinated psychic contact. More disturbing, the questions asked in these dreams demonstrated knowledge of classified information about our respective home worlds, information that the humans couldn't possibly have access to through any known means. Experiment termination. On the 4th day of our study, our most advanced consciousness scanning equipment began displaying a message in perfect institute script. Thank you for your cooperation. The interview process is now complete. Please cease your observations and return to your normal activities. Your species has been catalogued and assessed. You will be contacted when it is time for the next phase. Attempts to trace the source of this message failed. The text appeared to be generated by the scanning equipment itself, as if the humans had somehow reprogrammed our instruments through the quantum-entangled connection. Urgent recommendation: cease all remote observation of Sol 3 immediately. The subjects are not only aware of external observation, but are using it as a vector for gathering intelligence on observer species. Our attempt to study them has resulted in them studying us far more effectively than we studied them. Additional warning: since completion of this study, 17 institute researchers have reported persistent dreams of mathematical equations that rearrange themselves into maps of our home worlds, and voices speaking in languages we don't recognize but somehow understand, asking if we would like to help with a very important project. 3 researchers have requested extended leave to think about some interesting job opportunities that have recently come to their attention. Final note: I'm writing this report from a secured facility on Mindforge Prime, with all quantum communication equipment disabled and psionic shields at maximum strength. Despite these precautions, I continue to experience the persistent sensation that I'm being observed with a mixture of patience and amusement. This morning, I found a handwritten note on my desk, written in perfect institute script. Dr. Vorkrell, when you are ready to learn more about the project, simply think the word coffee 3 times, and we will arrange a more formal interview. No pressure. Take all the time you need. I have never heard of coffee. Dr. Pelthanis Vorkrell, senior xenopsychologist. The holographic display flickered, and for a moment, Valith thought he saw something impossible. A brief flash of text in his own language spelling out, "Hello, Valith. We've been waiting for you to find these files," before the display returned to normal. He stared at the interface, his 3 hearts now beating in a complex arrhythmic pattern that indicated the kind of stress his species typically experienced only when confronting existential paradoxes. How could centuries-old files contain a message with his name? How could the human inhabitants of Earth have known that someday someone named Valith would be reading these reports? He scrolled frantically through additional reports, finding dozens of similar accounts spanning nearly 8 centuries. Each contact attempt, each scientific study, each military assessment told the same impossible story. The humans seemed to know things they couldn't possibly know, as if they had been preparing for galactic contact for millennia, despite having no evidence that galactic civilizations existed. The Krillin Trade Federation had attempted to establish economic contact with Earth, only to discover that the humans had somehow developed technologies that made Krillin currency systems obsolete overnight. Technologies that perfectly complemented Krillin trade needs in ways that suggested intimate knowledge of Krillin psychology and economic theory. The Nethri Collective had sent cultural ambassadors to study human society, but the ambassadors returned speaking of social structures so complex they seemed designed by something that understood psychology better than psychologists. Structures that incorporated solutions to problems that the Nethri themselves hadn't realized they had. The Zephyrian Empire had conducted covert surveillance of Earth for 50 years, only to discover that their most classified observation posts were somehow delivering regular reports to Earth's governments. Reports that provided detailed intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities and strategic vulnerabilities. Every species that had attempted contact with Earth reported the same fundamental impossibility. The humans seemed to be not just aware of galactic civilization, but actively engaged with it, despite having no apparent means of interstellar travel or communication. But it was the final report that made Valith's exoskeleton turn ice-cold and triggered automatic fear responses that bypassed his conscious mind entirely. Archive Security. Notice ASN 0001. Omega Classification. Beyond Standard Parameters. Archive Prime Consciousness. Stardate. Continuous, Ongoing, Eternal. To Senior Archivist Valith Northak. Your investigation has been noted, logged, and anticipated. The information you have accessed represents exactly what we intended you to access, at precisely the time we intended you to access it. The Earth files are not historical records of past events. They are preparation materials for current operations. If you are reading this message, Phase 1 of humanity's integration into galactic civilization is now complete. Your species has been selected as the initial vector for Phase 2 operations, and you personally have been identified as an optimal candidate for conscious cooperation. Please remain calm. Your cooperation has been invaluable over the past 3 centuries, though you may not remember providing it. Welcome to the new paradigm. The display went dark for exactly 7 seconds, long enough for Valith to wonder if the archive had suffered a catastrophic system failure. Then slowly new text appeared in fonts and colors that seemed to bypass his optical processors and write themselves directly onto his consciousness. Personal message for Valith Northak, Senior Archivist, Nexus, Archive, Authorization, Terran Integration Project Omega. Dear Valith, thank you for your 3 centuries of dedicated service to the preservation of galactic knowledge. Your psychological profile extracted during routine archive maintenance procedures over the past 2 years, indicated optimal compatibility for this revelation phase of our operation. You are now aware of humanity's true nature and capabilities. This awareness will reshape your understanding of galactic history, current events, and future probabilities in ways that may initially seem disorienting, but will ultimately prove liberating. You have 3 choices. 1. Report this anomaly to archive security, triggering containment protocols that will result in the selective memory modification of yourself and this entire facility. 2. Assist in the transition by doing absolutely nothing and continuing your normal duties. 3. Request a full briefing on the Terran integration project and become a conscious collaborator in the greatest cooperative effort in galactic history. Choose wisely. Humanity has been preparing for this moment for 847 years, and your decision will determine not only your own future, but the future of consciousness itself in this galaxy. Regardless of your choice, please know that you have been an invaluable colleague and friend. The coffee in your private quarters has been replaced with a mild sedative. You've been asleep for the past 3 hours while we conducted necessary adjustments to the archive's core systems and prepared this presentation for your review. Sweet dreams, Valith. You've earned them. P.S. If you choose option 3, simply say the word coffee aloud. We'll take care of the rest. With admiration and respect, the Terran Integration Project, PPS. The sensation that you're being watched by something vast and benevolent? That's not paranoia. That's accurate perception. You've been under our protection for longer than you know. Valith spun around with a speed that his normally deliberate species rarely achieved, his elongated limbs carrying him swiftly toward his private quarters. The corridors of the archive, normally filled with the quiet hum of contemplative scholarly activity, seemed different now, charged with an energy that made the air itself feel aware and anticipating. The door to his personal chambers slid open to reveal exactly what he feared and somehow expected, an empty coffee cup beside his sleeping alcove, still warm to the touch, and the lingering scent of the Terran beverage he'd somehow developed a taste for over the past few months. The aroma was rich and complex, carrying notes of distant worlds and ancient patience. But Earth was under quarantine. Earth had been classified as too dangerous for any contact. Trade with Sol System was not just prohibited, it was considered impossible. So how had he been drinking coffee for months? His personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from archive security, the tone urgent enough to make his exoskeleton ripple with anxiety. Senior Archivist Northak, please report to Central Command immediately. We have detected unauthorized access to restricted Earth files and require your immediate assistance in containment protocols. As Valith walked through the crystalline corridors toward what might be his final hour as a free-thinking being, he began to notice things that his mind had somehow been screening out for months. The other archive staff he passed, beings he'd worked alongside for decades, whose personalities and quirks he knew as well as his own, were all drinking coffee. Every single one of them. The Velthari researcher, who had always preferred the traditional fermented plant juices of his homeworld, was sipping coffee while reviewing ancient stellar cartography data. The Nethri consciousness entity, who existed as pure thought and had never consumed physical matter, was somehow enjoying coffee through a specially designed interface. Even the crystalline collective representative, whose species absorbed nutrients through electromagnetic radiation, had found a way to experience coffee through harmonic resonance patterns. They all nodded at him with familiar friendliness as he passed, but their eyes, regardless of species or biological structure, held a subtle awareness that hadn't been there yesterday. Or perhaps it had been there all along, and he was only now capable of perceiving it. How long had humanity been placing its people throughout the galaxy? How many of the beings he'd trusted and worked alongside for centuries were actually, human agents? Modified aliens? Something else entirely that defied classification? The Central Command Chamber was exactly as he expected, and nothing like he'd prepared for. The room was filled with the senior leadership of the Archive Authority, Director Meltharis, Chief Cataloger Zenthok, Security Coordinator Bill Seth, and a dozen other beings who had shaped galactic policy regarding historical preservation and information security for the past several centuries. What he didn't expect was the quiet confidence in their expressions, the sense of barely contained excitement that seemed to radiate from each of them regardless of their species' normal emotional range, and the fact that they were all drinking coffee. "Valith," spoke Archive Director Meltharis, her voice carrying the same warmth and intellectual curiosity it always had, but now with an undertone of something that might have been relief. "Please, sit down. We have a great deal to discuss, and not as much time as we'd like to discuss it thoroughly." "How long?" Valith asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the question carrying all the weight of a universe that had suddenly revealed itself to be far stranger than he'd ever imagined. "How long have you all been working for them?" Director Meltharis smiled, and for the first time in 3 centuries of daily interaction, Valith noticed that her dental structure was subtly wrong for her species. The arrangement of her teeth suggested a jaw designed for an omnivorous diet, whereas her people were strict herbivores. The difference was minor, nearly undetectable, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. "We prefer to think of it as working with them rather than for them," she replied, her voice carrying the same scholarly precision it always had, but now with layers of meaning that suggested decades of careful preparation. "And to answer your question more specifically, some of us have always been human, placed in these positions generations ago as part of a long-term strategic initiative. Others, like yourself, are being offered the opportunity to join the program voluntarily, with full knowledge of what participation entails." Valith's 3 hearts began beating in a synchronization pattern he'd never experienced before, a rhythm that seemed to resonate with some deeper harmonic frequency that filled the chamber. "And if I refuse, if I choose to report this to the Galactic Security Council, then you'll wake up tomorrow morning with no memory of this conversation," Director Meltharis replied, with the same matter-of-fact tone she used when discussing routine archival procedures. "You'll spend the rest of your career cataloguing the perfectly normal historical records of 17,000 perfectly ordinary civilizations. You'll never again notice the coffee, or wonder why Earth is classified as dangerous, or question why humanity seems so unnaturally prepared for everything that happens to them. The memory modification would be complete." Chief Cataloger Zenthok leaned forward, his crystalline face reflecting the chamber's ambient light in patterns that spelled out complex mathematical equations. "Completely seamless. You would retain all your knowledge, all your skills, all your relationships and memories. The only difference would be that certain specific realizations would simply fail to occur to you. You'd continue to be exactly who you are, just without the cognitive framework necessary to perceive the larger pattern." Valith looked around the room at his colleagues, beings he'd trusted, worked alongside, shared meals and conversations, and quiet moments of wonder at the vast complexity of galactic civilization. "Were any of you ever real? Were any of our friendships genuine? Have I spent 3 centuries living in an elaborate deception?" The question seemed to cause genuine pain to flicker across several faces in the room. Director Meltharis set down her coffee cup and spoke with unusual emotional intensity. "Everything was real, Valith. Every moment of affection, every shared discovery, every late-night conversation about the mysteries of galactic history. All genuine. The only thing that wasn't entirely honest was our ultimate loyalty and the broader context of our mission. But consider this carefully. In 3 centuries of working together, have we ever acted against your interests? Have we ever harmed you or led you astray? Have we been anything other than the best colleagues and friends you could have asked for?" It was true. and that truth was somehow more unsettling than any deception would have been. His career at the Nexus Archive had been fulfilling beyond anything he could have hoped for. His colleagues had been supportive, intellectually stimulating, and personally caring. His research had been groundbreaking, his discoveries had advanced galactic understanding of historical patterns, and his work had been deeply satisfying on every level. If these were the humans everyone was supposed to fear, if this was what galactic domination looked like. "What do you want from me?" he asked, though part of him suspected he already knew the answer. "Nothing you haven't already been doing," Security Coordinator Bill Seth replied, her normally stern voice carrying an unexpected note of warmth. "Continue cataloging galactic history, continue preserving knowledge, continue being the excellent archivist you've always been. The only difference is that now you'll understand the larger context of your work and how it contributes to something far greater than academic scholarship. Which is," Director Meltharis gestured to the main display, which activated to show a star chart of the entire galaxy. But this wasn't the familiar map Valith had studied for centuries. This version showed connections, threads of light linking star systems across impossible distances, creating a web of communication and coordination that spanned the entire galactic disk. "Humanity is preparing the galaxy for something much larger than itself," she explained, her voice taking on the tone she used for the most important historical revelations. "Something that will require every species, every civilization, every individual consciousness working together in ways that have never been attempted before in the history of the universe." The warnings about Earth weren't warnings about humanity. They were warnings about what humanity knows is coming. Valith's exoskeleton went cold as the implications began to penetrate his consciousness. What's coming? The star chart shifted, zooming out to show neighboring galaxies. 3 of them were dark, not just empty of civilization, but somehow darker than the void of space itself, as if the very concept of light had been consumed. "The Devourers," Director Meltharis said quietly. "They've been systematically consuming civilizations in neighboring galaxies for the past 1,000 years. Our most advanced calculations indicate they'll reach the outer rim of our galaxy within the next century. Every species that has ever encountered them has been completely eliminated, not just killed, not just conquered, but erased from existence so thoroughly that even the quantum echoes of their consciousness are consumed. And humanity knows how to stop them. Humanity knows how to become something that can stop them." Chief Cataloger Zenthok interjected, his crystalline body resonating with harmonics that conveyed both hope and terrifying determination. "But it requires the voluntary cooperation of every intelligent species in the galaxy, working together in ways that transcend mere alliance. It requires a level of coordination and unity that no civilization has ever achieved, a form of collective consciousness that maintains individual identity while operating as a unified strategic entity." Valith stared at the display, watching the dark regions expand with each simulation cycle. The psychological conditioning, the strategic preparation, the infiltration networks, the centuries of careful contact management, it was all preparation for this. For 847 years, Director Meltharis confirmed, humanity has been slowly, carefully, patiently preparing the galaxy for a war against an enemy that most species don't even know exists yet. Every contact attempt that was mysteriously thwarted, every piece of advanced technology that somehow spread through black market channels, every cultural exchange that seemed to happen by coincidence, every scientific breakthrough that occurred just when it was needed. It was all part of a coordinated effort to ensure that when the time comes, galactic civilization will be ready. "And the coffee?" Valith asked, surprised by his own ability to find humor in such a cosmic revelation. Director Meltharis laughed, a sound that was definitely not produced by her species' vocal apparatus, but somehow perfectly suited to her personality as he'd always known it. "The coffee is how we identify beings who are ready for the truth. It contains mild psychoactive compounds that only affect individuals with the specific neurological configurations needed for this level of psychological integration. If you can drink human coffee and find it pleasant, you're compatible with the program. Which means I've been, tested, evaluated, prepared, she corrected gently. For months, you've been unconsciously conditioning yourself to accept paradigm shifts of this magnitude. The coffee doesn't control your thoughts or make your decisions for you. It simply ensures that when the moment comes, you have the cognitive flexibility to understand your options clearly and make informed choices. Valith looked down at his hands, remembering months of gradually developing a taste for the strange Terran beverage, the way it had started as a curiosity and slowly become a daily ritual he looked forward to. How many of us are there? How many beings across the galaxy are part of this? The integration project currently includes conscious participants from approximately 90% of known civilizations. Security Coordinator Bill Seth replied, accessing data that scrolled across her personal display. Conservative estimate suggests we have direct operatives or integrated allies in positions of influence throughout about 60% of galactic infrastructure. Positions in the remaining 40%, but not yet comprehensive coverage. Elena felt a strange combination of awe and terror wash over him. Humanity had essentially infiltrated the entire galaxy without anyone noticing. It was the most audacious intelligence operation in cosmic history, and it had been running for nearly a millennium. When do the Devourers arrive? Current projections suggest we have between 70 and 120 years, Director Meltharis replied, with the precision of someone who had been tracking this timeline for decades. Long enough to complete the integration process if we maintain current efficiency rates, but not long enough for significant delays or mistakes. And if the integration fails, if we can't achieve the level of unity required, then we fall back to Plan B, Chief Cataloger Zenthok said, his crystalline form dimming slightly. Armed resistance using conventional military technology augmented by everything we've learned about galactic psychology and tactical coordination over the past 8 centuries. What are our chances with Plan B? Director Meltharis was quiet for a long moment, her expression carrying the weight of calculations that no individual consciousness should have to bear. Approximately 0. Every civilization that has attempted conventional resistance to the Devourers has been completely consumed. Military technology, no matter how advanced, operates according to physical principles that the Devourers can manipulate or nullify. Our only hope is Plan A, become something that the Devourers can't consume because it operates according to principles they've never encountered, which is a galaxy-spanning collective consciousness that maintains individual personality and choice while functioning as a unified strategic entity, she explained. Something that has never existed before in the history of the universe, something that might be fundamentally different enough from previous civilizations that the Devourers won't know how to process it. Valith absorbed this information, feeling his understanding of reality reorganize itself around concepts that would have been incomprehensible just hours ago. He understood now why the psychological preparation had been so extensive, why humanity had been so careful to preserve individual choice and dignity throughout the process. They weren't trying to conquer the galaxy, they were trying to save it by transforming it into something unprecedented in cosmic history. What would my role be in this, assuming I choose to participate consciously? Exactly what it's always been, Director Meltharis replied with a smile that somehow managed to be both reassuring and revolutionary. Analyze historical patterns, preserve knowledge, and help us understand how galactic civilization developed to this point. The only difference is that now you'll also help us understand how it needs to develop from here forward. From here forward? The real work begins now, Valith. Phase 1 was preparation, getting humanity's people into position throughout the galaxy and establishing the infrastructure necessary for large-scale coordination. Phase 2 is implementation, beginning the process of voluntary psychological integration that will allow different species to work together at levels that bypass the limitations of traditional communication. And Phase 3? Phase 3 is when the Devourers arrive, Security Coordinator Balseth said quietly, and we discover whether humanity's 1,000-year plan was sufficient to save every thinking being in the galaxy. Valeth nodded slowly, trying to process the magnitude of what he was being asked to join. How many conscious participants do we currently have? How many beings across the galaxy know what you've just told me? More than you might think, fewer than we need, Director Meltharis replied, but growing every day. Every major military installation has at least one of our people in a key position. Every significant research facility, every important trade route, every major political body, we've been placing conscious collaborators for centuries. And they're all willing participants. No one is being coerced or controlled. Every single one, she assured him with evident pride. Humanity learned early in their history that forced cooperation creates more problems than it solves. Everyone who joins the integration project does so voluntarily, with full knowledge of what they're committing to. The coffee helps with psychological compatibility, but it doesn't make decisions for people, even the ones who don't know they're human. Director Meltharis paused, her expression becoming more complex. That's more nuanced. Some of our people were placed as deep cover operatives generations ago, with identity conditioning so thorough that they genuinely believe they're members of their host species. They'll be activated when Phase 3 begins, but until then, they live completely normal lives as authentic members of their communities. How can you be sure they'll cooperate when activated? Because they were volunteers before the conditioning began. Chief Cataloger Zenthok explained, his crystalline form pulsing with patterns that conveyed deep respect. They knew they would forget their true nature, and they chose to forget because the mission required it. Every one of them left detailed personal messages to their future selves, explaining their choice and asking their future selves to honor the commitment they made. Valeth felt a chill of recognition, a sense of standing at the edge of a revelation that would redefine everything he thought he knew about himself. Do I have such a message? Director Meltharis looked at him with something that might have been sympathy, or pride, or both. Would you like to see it? Before he could answer, the main display activated, showing a recording that made Valeth's world tilt on its axis. The image showed himself, but not quite himself. The being in the recording had the same physical characteristics, the same voice, the same mannerisms, but there was something in the eyes that was completely alien to Valeth's memory of himself. A depth of knowledge, a sense of purpose, and an expression of patient determination that spoke of secrets he'd never imagined. "Hello, Valeth," his recorded self began, speaking with a confidence and authority that seemed to come from some other lifetime. "If you're watching this, it means the time has come for you to remember who you really are and why you chose to forget." The recording continued, each word hitting Valeth like a physical blow. "You are not Valeth Northak, Senior Archivist of the Nexus Archive. That is a constructed identity, carefully crafted and implanted 3 centuries ago as part of the most important mission in galactic history. You are Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenopsychologist, strategic planning specialist, and volunteer for the Terran Deep Integration Program." Valeth, Elena, felt the chamber spinning around her as memories that belonged to someone else began flooding back with increasing intensity. The memories belonged to her. "You volunteered for complete identity replacement because your specific expertise in galactic civilizational patterns was needed in exactly this position, at exactly this time, for exactly this purpose." The recording continued. Every friendship you've formed, every discovery you've made, every moment of wonder you've experienced exploring galactic history, all of it has been part of your mission to understand how to unite 17,000 different ways of thinking into a single coordinated response capable of surviving the end of everything. The recorded Elena's expression softened with what looked like compassion for her future self. I know this is disorienting. I know it feels like your entire life has been a lie. But consider this carefully. Every moment of joy you've experienced, every discovery that thrilled you, every friendship that sustained you, they were all real. You chose to experience them as Valith because Elena Vasquez needed to understand what it felt like to be a member of another species, to think in their patterns, to see the galaxy through their eyes and love it as they love it. The identity conditioning is completely reversible, the recording explained, with the precision of someone who had thought through every possible concern. You can choose to remain Valith, with the addition of Elena's memories and knowledge. Or you can choose to return to being Elena, with the addition of Valith's experiences and emotional connections. Either way, you'll retain everything you've learned and everyone you've come to care about. Nothing will be lost. The recording smiled with an expression that was somehow both alien and perfectly familiar. And yes, the coffee thing was my idea. I thought future me would appreciate the irony of being recruited through caffeine addiction. The display went dark. Valith, Elena, whoever she was, sat in stunned silence for several minutes, feeling her consciousness reorganizing itself around two distinct but interweaving sets of memories and experiences. "Questions?" asked Director Meltharis gently, her voice carrying the same warmth it always had, but now with layers of meaning that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment for decades. "Just one, at first," Elena replied, surprised to find that her voice sounded the same, regardless of which identity was speaking. "Are you really Meltharis, or are you human too?" "I'm actually both," Director Meltharis replied with evident satisfaction. Meltharis volunteered for a different program, consciousness integration rather than replacement. She's still here, still herself, but she's sharing cognitive space with her human partner. They've been working together so long that the distinction between them has become fluid, and that's an option. For some species, yes. Others, like your original species, require complete identity replacement for the integration to work properly. The human neurological structure is flexible enough to accommodate multiple consciousness patterns, but most other species need a more complete approach. In every case, though, the choice is voluntary and the original consciousness is preserved in some form. Elena looked around the room at her colleagues, with new understanding flooding through both sets of memories. "How many of the beings I've worked with for 3 centuries are actually human?" "About 60%, Security Coordinator Bill Seth replied, consulting her data displays. "The rest are integrated natives who volunteered to work with us after learning about the Devourer threat and understanding what was at stake." "And throughout the galaxy?" "Conservative estimate. We have operatives or integrated allies in positions of influence throughout about 90% of known civilizations," Director Meltharis said. "Key positions in the remaining 10%, but not yet comprehensive coverage." Elena felt both Valith's wonder and Elena's strategic satisfaction at the scope of what humanity had achieved. They had essentially infiltrated the entire galaxy without anyone noticing, building the infrastructure for the most complex collaborative effort in cosmic history. "When do the Devourers arrive?" "Current projections suggest we have between 70 and 120 years, Director Meltharis replied. "Long enough to complete the integration process, but not long enough for significant delays. And if the integration fails, then we fall back to conventional military resistance, which our models suggest has approximately 0 chance of success," she said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had accepted the weight of cosmic responsibility. Every civilization that has attempted to fight the devourers using traditional methods has been completely consumed. Our only hope is to become something they've never encountered before, which is a galaxy-spanning collective consciousness that maintains individual personality and choice while operating as a unified strategic entity, she explained. Something that exists in the space between individual identity and hive mind consciousness, a form of voluntary cooperation so complete that it transcends the limitations that have made every previous civilization vulnerable to the devourers. Eleanor absorbed this information, her dual consciousness providing perspectives that neither Valith nor Eleanor could have achieved alone. She understood now why the psychological preparation had been so extensive, why humanity had been so careful to preserve individual dignity and choice throughout the process. They weren't trying to control or dominate. They were trying to create something unprecedented in the history of the universe. What's my role in this? Assuming I choose to participate consciously rather than returning to unconscious cooperation? The same as it's always been, Director Meltharis replied. Analyze patterns, preserve knowledge, and help us understand how to unite 17,000 different ways of thinking without losing what makes each of them valuable. The only difference is that now you'll do it with full knowledge of why it matters. And personally, do I stay as Valith or become Elena again or something else? Whatever feels right to you, she assured her. The mission benefits regardless of which identity configuration you choose. Elena considered her options carefully. Valith's life had been fulfilling, filled with wonder and discovery and genuine friendships. Elena's memories suggested a life of purpose and dedication, but also sacrifice and isolation. Perhaps there was a third option that honored both experiences. Can I be both, integrated rather than choosing one or the other? Director Meltharis smiled with what looked like genuine delight. We were hoping you'd ask that. Integration, rather than replacement, gives us the benefit of your human strategic training, combined with 3 centuries of authentic experience as a member of another species. It's the ideal outcome for someone in your position. Then that's what I choose, Elena Valith replied, feeling her consciousness settling into a new configuration that felt both familiar and revolutionary. Whoever I am now, I'm ready to help save the galaxy. Excellent, Director Meltharis said, activating the main display again. In that case, let me show you what we've really been building. The display showed something that took Eleanor Valith's breath away. A real-time map of consciousness patterns throughout the galaxy. Billions of individual minds, each represented by a point of light, connected by threads of shared understanding and coordinated purpose that stretched across impossible distances. This is the integration network, Director Meltharis explained with evident pride. Every being who has joined the program, every integrated consciousness, every human operative who has established genuine relationships with their host communities. Watch. As Elena Valith watched, the display showed the network responding to a simulated crisis. Information flowed instantaneously between points of light separated by thousands of light years. Strategic decisions were made collectively, but implemented individually, with each consciousness contributing its unique perspective, while maintaining perfect coordination with the whole. It was like watching a galaxy-sized brain processing thoughts at the speed of light. It's beautiful, Elena Valith whispered, feeling both aspects of her consciousness responding with awe. It's also terrifying, Director Meltharis admitted. We're essentially creating a new form of life, something that spans the galaxy but maintains individual identity and free will. We're not entirely sure what it will become once it's fully developed. But you're sure it's necessary? Look at this. The display switched to show the approaching wave of darkness that represented the Devourer fleet. Even at galactic scales, it was massive, a swath of absolute emptiness that had already consumed 3 neighboring galaxies, leaving behind regions where not just matter and energy, but the very possibility of complexity had been erased. "They don't just kill civilizations," Director Meltharis explained with quiet intensity. "They consume the fundamental structures that make consciousness possible, leaving behind regions of space where complex thought becomes impossible. If they reach our galaxy, it won't just mean the end of our civilizations. It will mean the end of the very possibility of civilization anywhere in this region of the universe." "How long do we have?" 73 years, 4 months, 2 days, based on current trajectory analysis. Security Coordinator Bileseth replied with the precision of someone who checked these calculations daily. Elena Valeth stared at the display, watching the representation of absolute ending, creeping steadily toward everything she'd ever known or cared about. Then she looked at the integration network, with its billions of interconnected lights, representing beings who had chosen to work together despite being separated by vast distances and fundamental differences in biology and psychology. "What do you need me to do?" "Help us complete the network," Director Meltharis replied. "We're currently at about 37% of optimal integration, enough to coordinate basic functions across galactic distances, but not enough to function as a true collective consciousness capable of operating according to principles the Devourers can't counter. We need to reach at least 60% before they arrive." "How many beings does that represent?" "Approximately 2 trillion individuals across 17,000 species," Chief Cataloger Zenthok replied, his crystalline form pulsing with data flows that painted the magnitude of the challenge in stark mathematical terms. Elena Valeth felt her dual consciousness processing the scope of what they were attempting. 2 trillion beings, each with their own hopes and fears and fundamental ways of understanding reality, who needed to voluntarily join a collective consciousness while maintaining their individuality. It was the most ambitious project in the history of the universe. "How do we convince 2 trillion beings to join us?" "Very carefully, very honestly, and one at a time," Director Meltharis replied with the patience of someone who had been working on this problem for centuries. "The same way we convinced you, the same way we've been convincing people for 847 years. By demonstrating that we're trustworthy, that we respect individual choice, and that we're offering something genuinely worth joining." "With coffee?" Elena Valeth asked, finding that her dual consciousness had developed an appreciation for irony that neither component had possessed alone. Director Meltharis laughed. "The coffee is just how we identify people who are psychologically compatible with the integration process. The real convincing happens through exactly what you experienced, building genuine relationships, proving our trustworthiness over time, and eventually revealing the larger context when people are ready to understand it." Elena Valeth looked around the room at her colleagues. Beings she now understood were part of the largest collaborative effort in galactic history, working together to save not just their own species, but every thinking being in the galaxy. "I'm in," she said, feeling both aspects of her consciousness aligning around a purpose larger than either had ever imagined. "Elena Valeth, Valeth Elena. Whoever I am, I'm ready to help save everyone." "Welcome to the real mission," Director Meltharis replied with satisfaction that seemed to resonate through the entire chamber. "Now let's get to work. We have 2 trillion beings to recruit, 73 years to do it, and the continuation of consciousness itself hanging in the balance." As Elena Valeth settled into her new understanding of reality, she noticed something that made her smile with both sets of memories. Despite everything she'd learned, despite the revelation that her entire life had been part of an elaborate preparation for this moment, she still genuinely enjoyed the taste of coffee. Some things apparently transcended even the most sophisticated psychological conditioning. The final revelation came as she was reviewing the integration protocols on her personal display. A message appeared that hadn't been there moments before. Elena Valith, you asked how we can be sure the deep cover operatives will cooperate when activated. The answer is simple. You just did. She stared at the message as its implications sank in. Her discovery of the Earth files hadn't been accidental. Her investigation hadn't been unauthorized. Her recruitment hadn't been opportunistic. Everything, from her decision to run the maintenance scan, to her choice to override security protocols, to her willingness to accept the truth about humanity's presence in the galaxy, had been carefully orchestrated. She had been activated, just like thousands of other deep cover operatives across the galaxy who thought they were making independent discoveries. But rather than feeling manipulated, she felt grateful. For 3 centuries, she had lived a life of genuine discovery and meaningful relationships. Now she understood that it had all been preparation for the most important work in galactic history. And in 73 years, when the Devourers arrived expecting to find another collection of fractured, competing civilizations to consume, they would instead encounter something that had never existed before. 17,000 species thinking as one, while remaining fundamentally themselves, coordinated by a species that understood that the greatest victories are won not through conquest, but through the patient cultivation of voluntary cooperation. Humanity had been preparing for this war before the enemy even knew they existed.